Hey everybody, welcome to episode 39 here on What About Therapy. I'm Enoch Fossum and I'm a certified mindfulness life coach.
And I'm Austin Ivy, and I'm certified in the basics of acceptance and commitment therapy, and we're both going to school to be marriage and family therapists.
In this episode, we're going to be talking about ACEs and what it means to have a high ACE score and what that does, what the effects are on that.
Let's get right into it.
Let's do it. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're almost on episode 40. That's kind of crazy.
Big milestone.
Yeah, huge. Maybe we'll have a special guest.
Maybe.
Who knows? We'll see. Find out next week.
A special guest will be Zuko.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Zuko and his collar, if you can hear that.
He's just going to be sniffing into the mic the whole episode.
What do you have to say? Anyway, like you heard in the intro, we're talking about ACEs and what that means. It's an acronym. As you know, we love acronyms.
Like the last 4 episodes was acronyms.
We love acronyms on this show. But ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And the bulk of this episode is going to be coming from the book The Deepest Well by Nadine Burke-Harris. She's a huge advocate for ACEs, and she's really the one who pushed this forward. She didn't perform the study that discovered adverse childhood experiences and what those do.
Yeah, she didn't necessarily find this she didn't come to the revelation of this thing. She had some experiences that led her to do her own research where she found this research and advocated for this I don't even know what to call it, this test, because it is a test and it's a way of understanding childhood experiences. But yeah, she's a huge advocate for it, and her book is amazing. That we both read it, and it's really cool understanding of what ACEs are, how they can affect people, and the best way to overcome childhood traumatic experiences.
Yeah, and so she's definitely a modern day pioneer when it comes to ACEs. She's pioneered it.
Absolutely.
At least bringing it back from when the study was.
She's a medical doctor.
Done.
I guess that should be clarified. She was a medical doctor in San Francisco, I believe, that was
I think so.
treating some lower income people that had a lot of adverse childhood experiences of their own which caused some problems for them, and that seeing those people that she was treating and dealing with on her day-to-day aspect in her practice led her to be a huge advocate for this research, the ACE research. So really cool stuff.
And the ACE test or the ACE study was done from 1995 to 1997. And in that time period from now, it was buried a little bit and not really popular. And so Nadine was able to bring that to light. Yeah. And now it's definitely getting a lot more traction.
So you haven't heard about it, you're probably not alone. I hadn't heard about it until about 3 months ago when our internship manager that me and Enoch were working for, she kind of assigned it to us as a almost a required reading, but more like a suggested reading for the things we'd be dealing with as interns for this organization. So I hadn't heard about it up until then. I know Enoch had before that, but I hadn't. And it's not a very common thing, like Enoch was saying. It was kind of buried a little bit and wasn't very popularized until Nadine came around and wrote this book and really started getting pushed into the limelight of mental health, and it's starting to gain more traction and understanding in the mental health and physical health world. It's starting to get picked up a little bit more.
Yep.
I guess what we should preface this with as we get into it, these ACEs, which there's an awesome test that we're going to go through here.
You'll be able to take it with us now.
We're going to all take it together. Obviously, we're not going to be saying our adverse experiences on air here, but we'll go through that in a minute. But these ACEs, or these adverse childhood experiences, can basically, we're going to talk about this later, but they can affect your actual physical health and the way your body and brain develops and the way you develop as a child. We're going to get into that later, but the higher your ACE score is, the more likely you are to have health complications in the future. And we'll get into more of the details and some of the facts on that after we finish the test.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Get right into the test then.
I think we're going to get into it. And the link to this test will be in the description. So if you want to go back and look at the questions, if you want to actually read them, you can go ahead and do that. We'll just link it down below.
And the article, there's some good information in the article that is linked with the test as well. It's on npr.org, and so It's funded by a nonprofit. It's not driven by any type of I don't know, political leaning or anything like that. So really good stuff on it. So let's get right into it. And so just keep track of how many you say yes to, because every time you say yes, that is a point on the ACE test and
A tick.
a tick.
Yeah.
Let's call it a tick. Is a point. It's not usually points are a good thing. Or these aren't
Yeah,
necessarily
we're
good
playing
things.
golf here. You want a low score.
Yeah, put a little tick. So in your mind, just keep track of how many you say yes to, and that we'll talk about that afterwards. So question 1: before your 18th birthday, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you feel afraid that you might be physically hurt? So yes or no on that, and you can go back and listen to it if you need to. Before your 18th birthday, did
Question
a parent...
2.
Yeah, sorry, question 2. Before your 18th birthday, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or you were injured? Third question: before your 18th birthday, did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touch their body in a sexual way, or attempt to or actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? Question 4: before your 18th birthday, did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? Question 5: before your 18th birthday, did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, or had no one to protect you? Or were your parents ever too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor when you needed to? Before your 18th birthday, was a biological parent ever lost to you through divorce, abandonment, or other reason? Before your 18th birthday, was your mother or stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her? Or sometimes often or very often kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something else hard? Or ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes or threatened with a gun or a knife? Before your 18th birthday, did you live with someone or anyone who was a problem drinker, alcoholic, or used street drugs? Before your 18th birthday, was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? And lastly, question 10, before your 18th birthday, did a household member go to prison? That's all of them. So if you need to go back and listen to them, or go to the link at the website to read them again and maybe slowly go over them to really think about it and to keep track of them, you can. But those are the 10 ACEs that are part of this quiz. And now that you have your, I don't want to say score, but maybe your tally of how many ACEs you have experienced in your life, we're now going to talk about what that means and how that could potentially affect you in your future and your children if you choose to have them. So one thing that I guess the biggest takeaway from having a high ACE score, or having even a moderately low ACE score, even any ACEs at all, is what really happens is the childhood brain adapts and becomes used to living in a threatening environment. It's almost like the stress response is always on. Mm-hmm. It's always ready for some type of adverse experience, like it says in the name. It's always ready to defend itself. And this just leads to a higher stress response in general, and just more stressed over time, just more stressed, just kind of like, I guess, sitting stress. You're just stressed all the time.
Yeah.
Because your brain is just used to being stressed because it feels like it has to be on all the time, which can just lead to more long-term stress. And when this happens at a young age, it can affect body and brain development. And so high ACE scores have been linked to things like type 1 diabetes, heart disease, liver failure, cancer, for children, like growth development issues. I guess one example in the book of The Deepest Well, one of the first instances that set the author Nadine Burke Harris. Burke Harris. We'll say Dr. Burke Harris. What set her off to researching this was this young man who came in, and she came in, I believe, the young man's mom bring him in to obtain ADHD medication because the
Mm-hmm.
teacher was
Mm-hmm.
just a little bit worried about his hyperactivity in the classroom. And she walked in and saw him and was like, "Oh, it looks like a pretty healthy 4-year-old." And after reading the chart, found out that he was actually 8 years old, but he was the size of a normal 4-year-old, so he was 2 times as small as he should be, I guess. And this led her to go into some questioning. Like, is he eating enough, and does he have any other health complications that we don't know about? What's this and that? And she said, well, no, he's pretty healthy. We just came in for ADHD medication. And after digging deeper, it found out that at 4 years old, he was severely sexually abused and lived in there was an alcoholic living in his home. So he had a moderately high ACE score starting at a really young age, and that stopped his development. He stopped growing. His body was so focused on the stress response of protecting itself all the time that it literally stopped growing, and it started to cause all these other health complications like growth, like development in his body, and it probably even caused the ADHD. And so that's just an example of how the high ACE score can affect your actual biological health and your body and brain development.
Yeah, and here's one of many quotes from the book. We have a lot here that we're going to read just because it's gold. But here, Dr. Burke Harris talks about the criteria or some of the symptoms that you look for in having a high ACE score. Because she was seeing that a lot of people coming into her clinic were they all had ADHD, they were all hyperactive,
Mm-hmm.
they were impulsive. And so she says this: if you remember the criteria for an ACE score, or at least seeing if someone has an ACE score just by the way they're acting, include inattention, impulsiveness, and hyperactivity. She goes on to say, but the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders, so the DSM, doesn't say a word about the underlying biology. What it does say is that if these symptoms are associated with a different mental disorder like schizophrenia, then it's no longer ADHD. Similarly, if we see impulsivity and hyperactivity, but discover that these symptoms are caused by a brain tumor, we can't diagnose ADHD. And so, right there, she's saying that we don't look at adverse childhood experiences enough, at least didn't before this.
Starting to a little bit more now.
Yeah, we've started to a lot more now. But we would just prescribe ADHD if there weren't things like a brain tumor or schizophrenia, and we'd go ahead and give them the ADHD pills, you know? But now she's saying that because of adverse childhood experiences, that should be a reason to not just give them ADHD pills.
Yeah.
The underlying cause needs to be fixed and addressed, and not just the symptoms. And I think far too often, at least people that I've known that have ADHD have a high ACE score. And so they don't need ADHD medication. They need to address that underlying cause,
Yeah.
which is the ACE score.
Exactly. And I guess diving a little bit deeper into like the neurochemistry and neurobiology, I guess another quote coming from the deep as well is that they found that the more symptoms a kid had, some of the symptoms that we just talked about, is the higher the cortisol his or her levels were, and the smaller the volume of his or her hippocampus. And after the first measurement of the hippocampus, they measured the same kids again 12 to 18 months later after their first initial assessment, and found the hippocampi were even smaller, despite the fact that these kids were no longer experiencing the trauma. So the trauma had came and passed. They did their initial evaluation, but the trauma was still, it's like the brain was still experiencing that in the moment, and it was continuing to shrink the hippocampus, which was causing the hyperactivity and the irritability, the other symptoms that Enoch was just talking about, which then in the future causes other biological problems. And so, the parts that were responsible for learning and for memory were still shrinking, despite the fact that the trauma and the experiences had come and gone, and thus showing us that the effects of earlier stress were still acting on the neurological system. So this just shows the long-term effects that having that there, that like just having the ACE, even if it's just a one-time thing, that this thing happens. You get that tick on the ACE test, and it does have the possibility to continue to wreak havoc on your neurological system, on your the rest of your biological systems, your body, your liver, your pancreas, your stomach. It's linked to a high A score is linked to so many unfortunate biological outcomes that it's kind of scary actually. But it just shows that even just a couple experiences that happen one time can cause a lifetime of problems.
Right. If they're not addressed.
Yeah, and if they happen at a really young age too.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that later as well. But so having an ACE score of 2 or more actually doubles someone's likelihood of developing an autoimmune disorder. And you might be saying, "Oh my gosh, I have a score of 2 or 3 or 4, whatever your score is. You are that much more likely to develop an autoimmune disorder." And like Austin was just saying, Dr. Harris says that the main issue is that when the stress response is activated too frequently, or if the stressor is too intense, the body can lose the ability to shut down the HPA and SAM axis. The term for this is disruption of feedback inhibition, which is a sciencey way of saying that the body's stress thermostat is broken. So when your stress response system is activated too frequently when you're a child, when the brain's trying to grow, to learn new things, to essentially develop, when too much cortisol is pumped into the brain, when they're living with a bear, in a sense, it literally shuts down the... Zuko's trying to jump up on Austin right now.
He's biting me.
Yeah, chill out, dude.
Thank you.
But anyway, too much cortisol, too much stress shuts down the body's stress thermostat. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't know if the stress level is too high, too low, or whatever it is. And so it doesn't work, which just causes havoc. And like Austin said, it stunts your brain because your brain's only focused on survival, not growth. And so that's where it puts all of its time and energy, is keeping the stress response going to keep you alive, because doesn't want you to die.
Yeah, I guess looking at the more of the societal, cultural aspects of it, if you put in a person who's used to, like Enoch said, living with the bear, that in their mind, that's kind of what they're experiencing, is always being around a harmful person or situation. That's their brain's, I guess, go-to default setting is. And you put them in a normal situation, like just being in a classroom or in a normal, healthy relationship with someone that they're dating or having gotten married to. You put their hyperactive stress brain into a normal situation, they are not going to respond correctly. They're going to have that hyperactivity because their brain's used to living with the bear and dealing with these stressful situations. And so it's no wonder they have these hyperactive tendencies and these inappropriate, like, cultural or I guess behavioral problems, because their brain is hardwired to live with the bear, not to just have a normal life. That's where we see those issues come in, is because of those neurological changes. And like we were talking about earlier, I feel like you experience these ACE test criteria. It's specific ages that are most at risk. Like the younger you are,
it's before 18.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why every question in the test says before age 18.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because
we call it neuroplasticity. That's what it's called. Like when your brain is very susceptible to change and to experiences for good and for bad. Mm-hmm. That's why you learn a lot as a kid, and you can pick up skills really easily. That's why you see kids pick up sports so easily, because they're so plastic.
Learn new languages.
Yeah, exactly. That's why kids you see a toddler pick up English faster than an adult could pick up English, learning another language, just because their children are so plastic.
Yeah.
Their brains are, I should say, not literally.
They're plastic.
And that's why it causes these problems, because all these other developments are going on. And so you throw in a stress response like these, like a high A score, or even just an A score of 2, like we were just talking about. It just throws in a wrench into things. It causes a pause on what should be normal development. And that's what's so dangerous about these situations that cause a high A score. And I guess one thing that I wanted to point out is that people who have a high A scores that then have children, it's likely that their children will then come out with the same or higher A score than they did. because it just kind of gets perpetuated through the nurture and the relationship that they have with their children. And so that's another thing. It just kind of it goes across generations. So even if the kid itself doesn't necessarily experience the same ACE situations that their parents did, they'll likely end up with the same amount as their parent, just in different aspects, just because of the problems their parent had. And so it just gets perpetuated across generations. So that's why treatment and diagnosis is really important in this situation.
Yeah, you can be the one to stop this for future generations.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and now you might be asking, but Enoch, Austin, how do I change my ACE score? Or is there a way to get a lower score? My friend, the good news is yes, you can, which is awesome. And more studies have been coming out recently showing that these things that we'll talk about really do have a big impact on your ACE score. And you can essentially get rid of them. If not, just...
You can't go back in time and make them not happen, but you
right,
can.
Yeah.
You can make it so the effects of those situations don't cause you to
right.
have heart disease, or that you
Yep.
die from a heart attack at 55.
Yeah.
Or that you develop type 1 diabetes at 30. It's gonna if you can correctly and appropriately.
Kind of like dilutes it.
Yeah, it dilutes it. Yeah,
Yeah.
because you're still gonna have the problems from it. Unfortunately, that's how life is. But if you get it at the right time and you heal in the proper ways and take the right precautions, I guess.
Yeah.
You can lessen some of the impact that your high ACE score could otherwise have on you.
A significant amount.
Yeah, significant.
Like,
should
we're
be
not
said.
going to say like it's going to completely get rid of it.
Yeah.
Because what we've been learning is that when you create a new neural pathway, right? You start a new habit, that you're laying down a pathway on top of the old one.
Yeah.
And studies have shown that that old neural pathway doesn't go away. It stays there forever. And that's why you have, memories from a long time ago that you've tried to get rid of. You fall into bad habits after years of not doing that habit, because that connection there, that neural pathway is still there. There's just a different pathway on top of it. And so these pathways, you can create new ones, but the old ones will always be there. Now that can be, disturbing for some people, or
Maybe
kind of make them feel uncomfortable, discouraging. But that's also a good thing. Now it's just a reality that we have to come to terms with, that everything we've gone through, everything we do, really is laid down, if done enough, obviously, forever. But we can change it. Now, there are specific windows of change that Dr. Harris talks about. And so the 3 windows are when you're a teenager, okay, when you're going through puberty, when you are pregnant, if you're a woman, and also when you're a new parent, when you're a woman and a man. Mm-hmm. So a mom, new dad. Those are windows of change. Now, they're called windows of change because during these times, there are certain hormones that are higher than any other time in your life. Just like, I believe the main hormone that's really high when you're pregnant and as a new parent especially is oxytocin. And that's the bonding chemical. And when that chemical is really high, it opens up that window to change, or increases what's called synaptic plasticity, or that the ability for the mind to change and adapt. It opens up that window even bigger than what it normally is, because it's normally really small.
Especially as you grow up as an adult, It's the old, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. That's to a certain extent that's somewhat true, just because it's hard to build newer pathways as an adult. Like we said, it is possible with enough work and enough dedication, and you can do it. Please don't discourage. You can if you don't have any kids anytime soon and you're not a teenager anymore, it's possible. But yeah.
Right, it is hard.
Yeah, it is hard.
Yeah, it'll take a lot of time. And even during these big windows of change, it's still going to be hard.
Especially if your ACE, the higher your ACE score is, it's going to be more difficult. If you only have 1 or 2 versus 6 or 7, it's going to be more difficult to work through the 6 or 7 in the times of the windows of change, obviously. But at any given time, the lower the score, the easier it is to overcome, and the higher the score, the opposite.
Right. But the news you just need to know is you can change.
It's possible.
It's possible no matter what. No matter your score, you can change. Now, here are the 6 things that Dr. Harris and her team came to find that reduces your score. And some of these are going to say, well, that's dumb, that's obvious, or that's silly. And you're right. It's really simple stuff. It's not groundbreaking stuff here that we're going to talk about. So you may think it is pretty kind of...
you trivialize, oversimplified, but it should be encouraging for anyone who does have a high A score and wants to overcome it. It's not an easy path, but it's a simple path.
Right. Or anticlimactic is the word I was going to say.
Way to put it.
It might be a little bit anticlimactic, but it's going to be great. So, the 6 things. You ready? Number 1, sleep. Interesting. Number 2.
Some of that right now.
Mental health. Okay, prioritizing your mental health. Duh, right? 3, healthy relationships. 4, exercise. 5, nutrition. And 6, mindfulness. We're big on that one, as you know. But Dr. Harris goes on to say, after she gives us these 6 things that we can do, she says, we saw in our patients that these 6 things were critical for healing. As important, the literature provided evidence of why these things were effective. Fundamentally, they all targeted the underlying biological mechanism, a dysregulated stress response system, and the neurological, endocrine, and immune disruptions that ensued. And so what she's saying there is these 6 things all address the fact of the issue of a dysregulated stress response system, or a stress thermostat that doesn't work. All of these address that thermostat and help it to get up and running again. Mm-hmm. And so it sounds simple, but I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have said, oh, I don't do that. Or, oh, I could do better at that. Because I know I can in a lot of these areas. Because these areas really, they bring down our stress. And there's a ton of amazing studies that are coming out, especially on mindfulness, of what it does to the fight or flight response. Like when it's active, if you can learn to be mindful through a stressful situation, the stress isn't as bad. And it's not really considered a stressful situation anymore as far as like neurologically goes, because you're not releasing as much cortisol, or the stress hormone, which is really interesting. But you can see that all of these 6 things, it's kind of obvious why they're good for us. But all of these also, like Dr. Harris said, help our stress response system come back to normal, especially after going through adverse childhood experiences. A lot of the times, our stress response system isn't going to fix itself. Like we've talked about, it's going to stay that way until addressed. And so
it's doing what it's meant to do. It's in a stressful situation, and so it's designed out of the box to adapt to stressful situations. And so it's doing what it's supposed to do, so why would it fix itself? And it, in our brain's own mind, I guess, that's a kind of a contradictory phase, is doing what it's meant to do. And so, of course, it's not going to fix itself if it thinks it's doing the right thing. So that's why we have to kind of step in consciously to do things to fix the broken thermostat. And that's why it's so encouraging for me, at least. I mean, I have a couple aces myself, and it's encouraging to know that it's a simple path that might be a little difficult and might take a long time. But I can focus on sleep. I can focus on eating well and practicing mindfulness, and so can all of you, all of those 6 things. It doesn't require a grandiose, complex plan for you to overcome your A score of 3. It's simple and it's possible, and it's most likely to be done with help, like a therapist, like a loving family member, a spouse, and to be honest with them and to be dedicated to overcoming it, I guess, because your life will improve not only mentally, but of course, like we've been talking about, you're less at risk to die early or to develop heart disease or diabetes, things like that. It will have long-term implications that will be of your benefit that are worth it. So
right. And ACE scores, if you're thinking, oh, I have an ACE score of 2, 3, 4, whatever it is, and I haven't had a negative side effect.
Mm.
Just remember that ACE scores are in it for the long run. They'll, in a sense, come back and bite you in the butt when you're not paying attention, or when just out of the blue, out of random. You may have a stroke one day, and a part of that stroke will be because of your ACE score.
Your brain didn't develop properly, or
Yeah.
your heart didn't develop properly because of the adverse childhood experience you had. Stopped a certain type of development, that maybe some cells in your heart didn't get properly developed. And yeah, you were fine with it until you hit 50 years old, and then your health starts declining anyways, and it just goes off. Could be a
Right.
stroke, and you could be perfectly healthy otherwise, but because you had a little bit of a wrong development because of that, you won't even know that it hit you. That's what's kind of unfortunate about ACEs.
Yeah, you never know. So that's why self-care is worth it, man.
It really is.
Like, you're worth it. We've said that several times, especially in our What About series. You are worth it, and so it's worth it to take the time to take care of yourself. Despite your ACE score, even if you have an ACE score of 0, it's still important to take care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Now, last quote we want to read here from The Deepest Well. ACEs in toxic stress thrive on secrecy and shame, both at the individual level and at the societal level. We can't treat what we refuse to see. So I know this can be really hard for a lot of people, especially if you do have a high ACE score. You can tend to deny it, say, no, that didn't happen, or I'm fine, I'll be okay. The toxic stress, which is unnatural levels of stress, thrive in secrecy and shame. And so again, you are worth it to get help, to seek help, even if it's just talking with someone that you trust, whether that be a parent, a grandparent, a sibling, a friend. Just that can help you and can be a great start to getting on the road to healing.
And going back to the 6 things that you can do, and for most, I mean, all of these 10 things, none of it is your fault. And maybe there's some things
Right.
you can contributed to led to obtaining a tick on one of the ACE score questions. Maybe you could say that maybe you contributed to it, and it could be a little bit your fault. But that's not helpful. We talk about that all the time, that you could blame yourself for a high score, but that's not very helpful. But what it is helpful is understanding that it's not your fault that you're having these adverse experiences
Right.
in the long term, and that there are things that you can do to, I guess, overcome it and to take control of your life, and so that these ACEs don't control you. And again, just a reminder of those 6 things that you can do today, and you can focus on daily: sleep, focusing on your mental health, building healthy relationships, getting exercise, having good nutrition, and practicing mindfulness. And nowhere in that I can think of any person that has an inability to focus on any of those. In one way or another, you can focus on at least a few of those to help overcome your ACEs, the things that you've been through that are causing you maybe some trouble in your life and that could cause long-term troubles in the future. So even if you just need to focus on one, maybe you don't have the ability to focus on all of them at once.
Yeah.
Choose sleep, choose nutrition, choose mindfulness, and just focus on that. Once you've got that neural pathway really paved down, focus on the next one. Focus on mental health next, whatever it is, because you're worth it. It's not your fault if you've been through these problems or these experiences, and that it is possible to change even outside of those windows of neural or synaptic plasticity.
Yeah.
It is a little bit harder, but by golly, it's worth it, and it is possible.
My golly, it's worth it.
By golly, by gosh, it is worth it. And we hope all of you feel encouraged now, and maybe you didn't know that you had a high A score, but maybe now you do know, and maybe you didn't know you had a low one, and that maybe you are seeing effects from a low score. It doesn't really matter where you're at with your score. What matters is what you do about it in the long run.
Yep. There's always something you can do about
exactly. There's you can be 100% responsible for the things that you can do to make your life more livable.
That's right. Okay, well, I hope you learned something new. I know we've talked about ACEs in past episodes, and now if you didn't know, now you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's what ACEs are, adverse childhood experiences. And yeah, I hope you have been able to think of something that you can do for you. Now, self-care isn't selfish. Self-care isn't selfish. You are worth it. We'll say that a million times. Even on days you feel like you're not. Your worth never changes, ever. No matter what you do, no matter what's happened to you, no matter what you will do. Your worth is always going to be the same, and you are always worth it. And so get out there, make a change, be the difference you want to see in the world. Michael Jackson, make that change.
Choose one of those 6 things to start focusing on in a Michael Jackson way.
Anyway, with that note, taking us out is the one and only, the great, the talented, the stupendous
Michael Jackson. No, just kidding.
Oh, I wish. Even better, Danny D.
Thanks, guys.
What about therapy? What about therapy? What about therapy? Yeah. What about therapy? What about therapy? What about therapy? Yeah. What about therapy? What about therapy? What about therapy? What about therapy? Yeah.